Hi guys, welcome back. It's UK here again, another vid. Yesterday, a channel that I watch called Little Wars TV, who are a bunch of really great guys who do historical wargaming as part of their club, and have some really cool vids out there, which I recommend. Posted up a topic called "Is historical wargaming dying out?" I'm a Warhammer 40k player primarily. I like Ninth Age, a little bit of Age of Sigmar. I like Gaslands. Although I'm not really sure you call it a war game, but it's up there. And at our local club, we have some bolt action players. If you don't know bolt action, it's a World War II game. Very popular. And easy to get into. For me, historical wargaming has never grabbed me. I did take a look at bolt action because the guys were interested in it, but I just couldn't. It doesn't grab me the way it does them, and I don't like the game system. I much prefer the turn-based version that Games Workshop uses. I think it works much better. So it made me think, because I get the impression, right or wrong, games like 40k, Age of Sigmar, Gaslands, similar things, are where people are coming into that particular gaming hobby now. 40k has always been a gateway game. It's easy to pick up, it's easy to play, and like D&D in role-playing games, it's where everybody comes in and then they disappear off to something else once they get their teeth wet. About the right term. And the nice folks over at Little Wars TV are correct in saying, I think, that historical gamers are very much the older generation. 50s, 60s and thereabouts. And that, I can't really say why, but it might be the simple fact that these are people who remember things like the Second World War, who perhaps had more history of such things taught to them at schools. I don't know. This video also came up on a Warhammer 40k Facebook group that I'm on, and someone was asking, why do people play things like Warhammer instead of historical games? And I said, for me, it's the simple fact that, well, it's rule of cool, basically. For me, the science fiction and fantasy element is far more appealing, far more interesting than reliving the D-Day beach landings or Gettysburg or the Crusades, whatever your chosen era is. I find it far more stimulating for the imagination, whereas I think historical gaming is probably more a cerebral effort, if that makes sense. You're trying to reenact battles that actually played out, see whether you can do differently. Whereas, say, 40k, you're playing wars that never happened, will never happen, and it's a very different kettle of fish. I think the biggest problem in wargaming in general, and this still applies to Games Workshop's products as well as everybody else, is the cost. I mean, you're buying whatever your rules are at whatever price. I mean, you look at Games Workshop, you're looking at like a £60 rule book and a £30 codex, your army book. And I imagine certain other games are fairly similar, although probably not quite that high. I think bolt action is a lot cheaper to get into by that. And so, let's just turn around and say it costs you like 60 quid to get the relevant books that you need. You then got to buy your models, and you've got to buy your paints, you've got to get your brushes, and you've got to get your glues, and you've got to get your modelling tools, your clippers and your files and what have you. And before you've looked at it, I mean, I'm going to use 40k as an example again. But by the time you've bought your absolute basics, you've spent over £200. And although people like to say, well, it's not an expensive hobby, really, sorry, but £200 is, a lot. I imagine for most of us, that's like nearly a quarter of our probably monthly income or something like that. It's still a lot of money. And I think maybe that's one reason why I see online people getting into things like Gaslands or Frostgrave, cheap little war game substitutes, skirmish games, really, because a rule book for that, something like that, will cost you like about 10 quid, and you only need a handful of models, and so you don't, technically, something like Gaslands, you just need the rule book, and you need to go out and buy a couple of Hot Wheels cars, and that's assuming you don't want to paint and mod your cars. So I think a lot of it is cost, and I imagine that historical gaming has I don't know, just 40k, and a lot of the fantasy and sci-fi things I see use plastic or resin models. To me, historical war games have always been about metal models, so I don't know whether they still do that as a matter of course, whether it's plastic now or what, but the cost of models and cost of buying your army is quite astronomical, and I think that puts people off. And in this day and age, I would say over the last 20 years especially, but maybe even going back into the 90s, I think people have less spare time. I have a heck of a time trying to find times when I am both desiring to do my modelling and painting and building, and actually have the time to sit down and do it. Some people like to do it in like little 5-10 minutes here and there where they can. I can't do that. If I'm going to do it, I need to sit down for a good couple of hours. Then you've got to find the time to play, and while some games might be doable in an hour, some games might take 3 hours or a weekend, and people just don't have this anymore unless they are, surprise surprise, 50s, 60s and retired or close to it. So the question in Little War TV's video at the end was how can, or in one of the comments I think it was, how can historical wargaming pick up on, say, Games Workshop's I don't know how you put it, how can they pick up on the same sort of thing that makes them popular and get people playing? I think a lot of it comes down to complexity. War games, by their very nature, seem to be massively overcomplicated. I mean, I mentioned earlier that 40k is easy to get into and simple, and it is. But once you get playing and you add some rules and you add some bits and you use this and you use that, suddenly you're looking at a very complex game system. But I've found whenever I've looked at historical gaming, I mean, I'm talking proper historical gaming, not something like Bolt Action, which I think is a little bit more geared towards the masses. I think historical wargaming is really complicated. I forget the name of it, but I can recall reading quite a lot in the past about a World War II game that was designed to cover every eventuality sort of thing. So you had your main rules, but then there was rules for supply trains and supply points, and you had to make sure you had enough food for your army, and you had to make sure you had this and you had this. And I remember reading it and just thinking, good grief, what is wrong with some people that they need this as a simulation of war? I think war games need to, I think they certainly do need to tone down a level of complexity. I also think that they suffer in the same way that role-playing games do, is that they kind of get promoted to people who are already in the choir, as it were. You don't see people getting you don't see these companies advertising in means other than the appropriate magazines, or on the appropriate websites. It's not put out to the general public to try and draw new blood in. Is historical wargaming dying out? Is wargaming dying out? I don't think wargaming is. And I hope that historical wargaming isn't. But if something isn't done, and again, I can cover this into everything from role-playing games, war games, whatever. If something isn't done to start throwing it out to the general public to try and increase the interest and pick up new blood, younger players as well, I think it's going to have a hard time. At least with Games Workshop, they target teens and early 20s, people who are going to, if they get into it, probably stay in the hobby for many, many years. But anyway, I've just noticed this has gone on to like nearly 12 minutes now, so I'm going to stop waffling. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Check out Little Wars TV's channel. They are awesome guys. Their content is good. Can't recommend them enough. Take care, guys, and good gaming.